The annual Hartwell Industries Gala was supposed to be a celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the ballroom while executives in designer suits mingled with champagne flutes. I stood beside my husband David, wearing the emerald dress he'd picked out, trying to look like the perfect corporate wife. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet my boss, Richard Hartwell," David said proudly, his hand warm on my lower back. Richard's eyes swept over me dismissively before that cruel smile spread across his face. "Nice to meet the deadweight your husband carries," he said loud enough for the nearby executives to hear. The group erupted in knowing chuckles. "Richard," David started uncomfortably, but his boss waved him off. "Oh come on, we're all friends here," Richard continued, his voice dripping with false joviality. "Must be exhausting supporting a non-contributor. Some of us have wives who actually add value to our businesses." The executives nodded approvingly. Margaret Chen from accounting tittered behind her glass. "My wife runs our entire HR department," boasted Tom from sales. "What does yours do again, David?" David's face flushed red. "Sarah keeps busy with various projects." "Various projects," Richard repeated mockingly. "How wonderfully vague. Let me guess, charity committees and book clubs? The usual housewife hobbies." I smiled serenely, used to this treatment after 3 years of marriage. "Something like that." "Well, at least she's honest about it," Margaret chimed in. "Some wives pretend they're businesswomen when they're really just spending their husband's money." The circle of executives laughed harder. Richard raised his glass in a mock toast. "To honest housewives who know their place." "Excuse me," I said sweetly, "I need to powder my nose." I walked calmly toward the ladies' room, my heels clicking against the marble floor. But instead of going inside, I slipped into a quiet alcove and pulled out my phone. "Anderson Holdings, this is Marcus," came the familiar voice of my business partner. "Pull the Hartwell account tomorrow," I whispered, watching the party through the archway. "All of it?" "The entire 20 million. Marcus sounded surprised. "That's their biggest contract, Sarah." "Are you sure?" "Completely sure." "And Marcus?" "Make sure Richard Hartwell gets the call personally." I hung up and returned to the party, slipping back into my place beside David. Richard was in the middle of another story about his golf handicap, gesturing wildly with his champagne. "Ah, there she is," he said when he spotted me. "Did you get lost trying to find your way back? These business events can be confusing for civilians." More laughter rippled through the group. I simply smiled and checked my phone for the time. 9:47 p.m. Marcus was efficient. It shouldn't take long. "You know, Sarah," Richard continued, emboldened by his audience, "I've been thinking. Maybe David could bring you to the office sometime. Show you what real work looks like. Might inspire you to try contributing something meaningful." "That's very kind of you to offer," I replied graciously. "Of course, you'd have to stay out of the way. Can't have deadweight interfering with actual business operations." The executives were practically doubled over with laughter now. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, but he wasn't defending me. He never did. That's when Richard's phone started ringing. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Strange. It's Marcus Anderson from Anderson Holdings. Wonder what he wants at this hour." He looked around the circle conspiratorially. "Probably calling to thank me for our excellent service. Anderson Holdings is our biggest client, 20 million annually." He answered with his best executive voice. "Richard Hartwell speaking." I watched his face change as Marcus delivered the news. The color drained from his cheeks, and his confident smile vanished completely. "What do you mean, terminated?" "Effective immediately." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "Marcus, surely we can discuss this. Our partnership has been incredibly profitable." The executives around us had gone quiet, sensing something was wrong. David looked confused, glancing between his boss and me. No, I understand business is business, but..." Richard was practically pleading now. $20 million, Marcus. This will devastate our quarterly projections." Margaret Chen's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Tom from sales whispered, "Did he say 20 million?" Richard ended the call and stared at his phone in shock. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Margaret finally spoke. "Richard? What happened?" Anderson Holdings just terminated their contract, he said numbly. Our biggest account. They're pulling out completely. The impact hit the group like a physical blow. 20 million represented nearly 30% of Hartwell Industries' annual revenue. Without it, the company would struggle to stay afloat. But why? Tom demanded. What reason did they give? Richard shook his head slowly. Marcus just said they were taking their business in a different direction. No explanation beyond that. I finished my champagne and set the glass on a nearby table. How unfortunate, I said mildly. David turned to me, his brow furrowed. Sarah, did you know about this somehow? Know about what, darling? The Anderson account. You seemed unsurprised. Richard's eyes narrowed as he studied my face. Wait a minute. You made a phone call earlier. Right before this happened. I did make a call, I confirmed pleasantly. To powder my nose, as I mentioned. Who did you call? Richard demanded, his executive authority returning as suspicion took hold. I smiled and pulled out my business card, handing it to him with a flourish. His eyes widened as he read the elegant script. Sarah Anderson Williams, CEO, Anderson Holdings. The silence that followed was deafening. That's impossible, Margaret whispered. Anderson is your maiden name. It is indeed. Anderson Holdings has been my family's company for 3 generations. I took over as CEO 2 years ago when my father retired. I looked directly at Richard. We've been quite pleased with Hartwell Industries services. Until tonight. Richard's face went through several shades of red and white. You're Marcus Anderson's daughter and business partner. He handles operations while I focus on strategic partnerships and client relations. I paused meaningfully. Particularly decisions about which partnerships to maintain. David stared at me in shock. Sarah, you never told me you ran Anderson Holdings. You never asked about my work, darling. You always seemed content to let people assume I was just a housewife with hobbies. The circle of executives looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Tom's mouth hung open. Margaret had gone pale. Richard clutched his phone like a lifeline. $20 million, Richard said weakly. You just cost us $20 million. I prefer to think of it as redirecting $20 million toward partners who value mutual respect, I corrected gently. Anderson Holdings will be fine. We have plenty of other contractors eager for our business. Wait, Margaret said desperately, surely this is just a misunderstanding. We can work this out, can't we? Business disagreements happen all the time. I considered this for a moment. Well, I suppose respect can be learned. But it would require a significant change in corporate culture. Starting with leadership. Richard's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Yes, absolutely. Whatever changes you think are necessary. Excellent. I pulled out my phone again and dialed Marcus. Actually, I've changed my mind about the Hartwell account. Don't terminate it just yet. Richard sagged with relief, but I held up a finger. However, I'll need to see some immediate changes. Beginning with a public apology from Mr. Hartwell to every woman in this room for his disrespectful comments tonight. Richard's face flushed, but he nodded quickly. Of course. Ladies, I sincerely apologize for any offensive remarks. They were completely inappropriate. And Margaret, I continued, turning to the accounting manager, I believe you mentioned something about wives pretending to be businesswomen. Margaret looked mortified. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Williams. I had no idea about your position. That was terribly unprofessional of me. Apology accepted. Now, David, I turned to my husband, shall we go home? I have an early board meeting tomorrow to discuss our new partnership requirements. As we walked toward the exit, I could hear the frantic whispers behind us. Richard was already on his phone, probably calling an emergency board meeting. The story would spread through the company like wildfire by morning. David waited until we were in the car before speaking. Sarah, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me you were running Anderson Holdings? I started the engine of my Tesla, the one I'd bought with my own money, though David had never asked where it came from. Would it have mattered? You seemed happy enough letting your colleagues mock your deadweight wife. I should have defended you, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Yes, you should have. But now you know better. I pulled out of the parking garage and onto the city streets. And so does everyone else at your company. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Anderson Holdings stock up 3% in after-hours trading. Something about respecting partnership values trending on social media. Whatever you did tonight, it's good for business. I smiled and showed David the message. See? Sometimes standing up for yourself is the most profitable thing you can do. The next morning, David came home from work with interesting news. Richard Hartwell had called an all-hands meeting to announce new corporate policies about respect and professional conduct. Margaret Chen had been enrolled in sensitivity training. And the Anderson Holdings contract had been renewed for 3 years with a bonus clause for exemplary partnership conduct. Oh, and one more thing, David said with a grin. Richard asked if you might consider joining our board of directors. Apparently, they could use someone with your business perspective. I laughed and kissed my husband's cheek. Tell Richard I'll consider it. But only if the board meetings include actual business discussion instead of golf handicap comparisons. Sometimes the best way to handle deadweight comments is to show them exactly how much weight you actually carry.